The screens go red at the port. Customs systems, shipping insurers, and freight exchanges fail within the same hour. By sunrise, the world discovers that global supply chain was just another name for trust. Chapter 1. The Turning Point. The first reaction is confusion. Thousands of containers are loaded, sealed, and ready to move, but nobody knows which ones are legally cleared, financially insured, or safe to release. The second reaction is fear. Not because the cyber attack is the largest ever seen, though it is close, because it lands on top of another crisis that was already tightening the system. A major shipping corridor has become too dangerous for normal traffic after a regional confrontation spills into missile strikes, drone harassment, and emergency naval escorts. Freight had already been rerouting. Insurance had already been climbing. The cyber attack turns a strained system into a paralyzed one. For years, globalization had survived on a fragile promise. Goods could be made far away, financed somewhere else, insured by a third country, tracked on shared software, and delivered right on time because nobody important wanted to break the machine. Now the machine looks breakable. Governments respond like governments always do when they stop trusting a system they cannot control. They start building walls around the pieces they think they still can. Emergency export restrictions appear first. Food, fuel, medical inputs, industrial chemicals, semiconductors, transformers, and rare earth processing equipment are suddenly too important to leave to market logic. The language is temporary. The bureaucracy is not. Within weeks, resilience becomes the most expensive word in politics. The United States expands industrial subsidies and ties them to domestic sourcing. Europe does the same, but adds carbon rules, procurement rules, and security reviews that make foreign dependence look irresponsible. China tightens control over strategic minerals, battery materials, and the firms that move them. India sees the opening and offers itself as an alternative hub, but only on terms that deepen local production first. No leader says the era of globalization is ending. They all insist they are merely reducing risk. But risk reduction at this scale means the same thing everywhere. Imports that used to be treated as efficient are now treated as vulnerable. Supply chains that used to be optimized for cost are now interrogated like security threats. The private sector hears the message clearly. Boards stop asking where production is cheapest. They start asking what happens if a border closes, a payment network fragments, or a naval patrol fails. Factories that had spent decades scattering across continents begin moving closer to final customers, or into countries with military protection, treaty access, or political leverage. Warehouses fill again. Inventories return. Redundancy stops being waste and becomes survival. The markets call it a correction. Workers call it a chance. Consumers call it inflation. Poorer countries call it something harsher. For decades, the global economy let them plug into manufacturing, commodity exports, tourism, remittances, and outsourced services all at once. Now, the richer states are telling them that openness was acceptable only while it felt safe. And once that message is heard, the reversal begins to harden. Not as a grand ideological revolt, as 1,000 emergency measures that start behaving like permanent architecture. Chapter 2. The early effects. At first, everyday life still looks familiar. The shelves are not empty. The planes still fly. The apps still deliver goods to the door. But the friction shows up everywhere. A phone release is delayed because one component is trapped behind a licensing review. A hospital pays more for basic equipment because the cheaper overseas supplier now fails the new security screen. A car maker ships half-finished vehicles because the low-cost wiring harness that once crossed 3 borders now crosses none. Prices begin rising in a pattern that feels strange. Not one dramatic spike, a constant upward pressure, as if the whole economy has started moving with a backpack full of bricks. Politicians try to sell the pain as patriotic. Buy local, secure the chain, accept the premium. Some voters do, many do not, because higher prices feel noble only to people whose budgets still have room for nobility. The labour market changes too. Factory towns that spent years hollowing out begin hiring again. Ports tied to regional trade expand. Warehousing, freight rail, and domestic energy infrastructure all get busier. But the gains are uneven and the costs are immediate. A new plant in one state does not cancel out the fact that groceries, appliances, and rent are rising in all of them. That mismatch turns economic policy into a cultural war. One side argues that efficiency made the nation weak. The other argues that protection is just scarcity with a flag wrapped around it. Both are right often enough to stay angry. Outside the rich world, the damage comes faster. Export-led economies that grew by fitting themselves into global production lines discover the production lines are being shortened. Countries built around low-cost assembly lose orders. Tourism-dependent economies lose visitors as travel becomes more expensive, more surveilled, and more politically exposed. Debt looks heavier when foreign exchange earnings stop flowing the way spreadsheets assumed they would. Then the financial system starts copying the logic of trade. Governments pressure banks to keep settlement local. Data must stay at home. Cloud infrastructure must be licensed by friendly states. Cross-border payments still work, but they move slower, cost more, and attract more scrutiny. Multinational companies react by dividing themselves. The old global firm, with one supply chain and one digital backbone, starts splitting into regional twins. Different data stacks, different legal entities, different inventories, different political promises to different governments. The efficiency that once came from scale gets replaced by duplication. That duplication creates resilience. It also creates drag. And drag becomes the defining feeling of the new decade. The world is still connected. It is just no longer designed to move smoothly. Chapter 3. The cracks appear. The first countries to break are not the loudest ones. They are the quiet middlemen. The states whose business model was simple: stay open, stay neutral, move everyone else's goods, money, and data. In the old system, they thrived on flow. In the new one, flow is political. Shipping hubs lose volume as traffic regionalizes. Financial centers lose clients as capital controls harden by another name. Logistics giants discover that half their expertise was based on crossing borders that no longer trust each other. Then food becomes a problem, not because the world stops producing enough of it, because a deglobalizing system treats staples like strategic assets. Countries that once imported grain, fertilizer, and fuel with relative ease now face bidding wars distorted by national stockpiling. Richer governments can subsidize the new costs. Poorer governments can only absorb them until they can't. Protests spread through capitals far from the great powers that caused the reversal. The slogans differ. The structure is the same. The world economy has become less efficient, and the least protected populations are paying for the privilege of someone else's resilience. Migration pressure rises next. When food grows expensive, export jobs disappear and currencies slide. People move. But the same governments that are rebuilding domestic industry are also hardening borders. They need labour. They fear disorder more. So migration systems become harsher and more selective. Talent is welcomed through one gate. Desperation is turned away at another. That double standard poisons politics on both sides. Inside wealthy countries, Nationalist parties say the reversal proves they were right all along. Inside poorer ones, elites say the open world was always a lie sold by countries rich enough to abandon it when convenient. Then the internet begins to reverse with the trade routes. Not all at once, by layers. Data localization laws become speech controls. App stores split by region. Payment systems stop interoperating cleanly. Streaming catalogs diverge. Cloud contracts begin requiring geopolitical alignment clauses that would have sounded absurd a few years earlier. People still call it the internet. What they mean is a stack of guarded national and block-level networks with narrow bridges between them. The global public square shrinks into monitored districts. Even science starts slowing down. Research partnerships face licensing delays. Visa reviews stretch for months. Sensitive fields become fenced off behind security classifications, industrial policy, and fear that collaboration now means transfer. The world does not become self-sufficient. It becomes suspicious, and suspicion is expensive to feed. By now, the cracks are visible everywhere. A reversal that began as insurance against disruption is generating fresh instability on its own. The system is safer in pieces. It is also poorer, meaner, and harder to escape. Chapter 4: The New Normal. After enough emergency measures survive long enough, people stop calling them emergency measures. They become the operating system. Trade still exists at scale, but it is no longer organized around the fantasy of one frictionless world market. It is organized around blocks. A North American production sphere anchored by subsidies, energy, and military protection of nearby sea lanes. A European sphere built on regulation, carbon barriers, industrial planning, and managed dependency. A China-centered sphere that links manufacturing, infrastructure, finance, and raw materials through long-term state-backed deals. And a looser belt of middle powers from India to the Gulf to parts of Southeast Asia, trying to profit from everyone's distrust without becoming trapped by any single camp. The language of free trade survives in speeches. The reality is negotiated access. Tariffs return in disguised forms. Local content rules multiply. National security reviews become permanent veto points. Public procurement turns into a weapon for creating domestic champions. Everyone accuses everyone else of protectionism. Everyone keeps doing it. Companies adapt completely. Products are designed region by region. Factories are duplicated even when the math makes no sense on paper. Software launches with different compliance settings, depending on who is allowed to store the data, inspect the code, or audit the model. The word global survives mostly in marketing departments. Shipping changes too. The great container arteries still pulse, but more slowly and with armed shadows around them. Ports become strategic sites, guarded not just against theft or smuggling, but against sabotage, sanctions, and political coercion. Insurance is no longer a technical line item. It is a geopolitical weather report. Consumers adapt in quiet ways. Fewer choices, longer waits, higher baseline costs. Goods once so cheap they felt almost weightless now carry the visible price of stockpiles, duplicate factories, and screened suppliers. Repair culture returns, not out of romance, but because replacement is slower and more expensive. Governments celebrate this as resilience. Households experience it as constraint. The biggest change is psychological. A generation grows up assuming that strategic dependence is naive. Efficiency becomes something people associate with vulnerability. Self-sufficiency, even partial and costly self-sufficiency, becomes a moral good. That belief settles deeper than any single law. And once it does, reversal stops feeling temporary. It starts feeling like common sense. Chapter 5: The World That Follows. In the settled version of this world, globalization is not dead. It is downgraded. Trade crosses oceans, but less casually. Capital crosses borders, but with escorts, disclosures, and conditions. Data moves, but only through approved corridors, watched by governments that no longer pretend the digital world is separate from the strategic one. Daily life feels narrower. Stores still carry foreign goods, but fewer of them. Electronics are more regional. Cars are built closer to the people who buy them. Medicine is stocked deeper and released more carefully. Travel is more expensive, more bureaucratic, and more revealing about where each passport still carries trust. The winners are visible. Countries with large domestic markets, energy access, industrial policy discipline, and enough military power to defend routes they consider vital. The losers are visible too. Smaller states that once lived by connecting larger ones now live by choosing between them. Neutrality still exists, but it is thinner and much more expensive to maintain. Growth is slower almost everywhere, not stagnant, not collapsed, just slower, heavier, and less forgiving. Inflation settles above the old expectations because redundancy costs money and fragmentation kills the cheapest path. Governments tolerate that burden because the old benchmark, maximum efficiency, has been replaced by a new one, maximum survivability. The culture changes with it. People buy more from nearby firms because policy nudges them there and risk teaches them to stay. Companies promise domestic resilience the way they once promised global reach. Politicians campaign on secure supply, secure data, secure food, secure power. Security becomes the adjective attached to everything. The world that follows is not dramatic. It is disciplined, less open, less surprised, less ambitious about interdependence. The old confidence that countries could grow rich together by binding themselves tightly enough is gone. In its place is a colder assumption. Prosperity is welcome, dependence is not. Epilogue. Globalization always sounded permanent while it was working, but it depended on habits that were easier to break than people wanted to admit. Cheap transport, open sea lanes, trusted payment systems, stable rules, and political leaders willing to absorb the risks of dependence. Take away enough of those at once, and efficiency stops looking modern. It starts looking reckless. That is what makes this branch plausible. The world would not need to hate trade to reverse globalization. It would only need to fear reliance more than it values speed.